You're welcome back. From security, we talk economy. And these things are tight, really, when you look at them. But why is this one particularly important? It's on the heels of, well, we call it an advisory, some sort of recommendation from the IMF, which is contained in its 2026 Article 4 consultation report on Nigeria. So it's a very extensive document. It started by saying, well, the reforms in Nigeria are improving macroeconomic indices, yet a lot of Nigerians remain poor, mixed bag, and then offered some recommendations that, you see, Nigeria, you need to find a way to improve on your revenue generation. So perhaps you might want to tweak taxes when it comes to fuel, telecommunications, and that naturally triggered Nigerians. And don't forget that earlier on in the year, the World Bank had also made suggestions about finding a way to maybe import petrol and see how to balance things here and there. But it eventually said, well, that wasn't the intention, and crawled back on that one. So the IMF has again come up with recommendations in that document. I want to just drill into that. We're joined on the program by Professor Adeola Adenikinju, Senior Economist, University of Ibadan. Professor as well. You're welcome to the program, Prof.
Good morning, Claudia. Thank you for having me.
We're grateful you can join us early Monday. I don't know what you make of this. Is this maybe the IMF not reading the room in that sense? Because this is a very touchy subject, not even now, right? So is it that the IMF is not reading the room, or the IMF is just doing what it has to do, regardless of the realities at home, which it actually acknowledged in that advisory? So what do you make of this IMF's recommendation, advice?
Yeah, thank you for Coyote. I think the IMF is doing what it does normally in any country where it goes. The priority usually is to ensure that there's macroeconomic balances. Okay, your fiscal balance, and other balances, internal and external. So if you look at the report, they commended the government for what it's doing right. They also acknowledge the fact that Nigerians are suffering, that the economy, that's tough economic environment. Unemployment has gone up, and they did advocate for cash transfers, that there must be a need to enhance, social investments. Okay, they're not saying that if you're going to pursue that, okay, the cash transfer, it should be funded separately. It must be funded, in a way that is, fiscal neutral. Okay, in which case you must have to then raise revenue to support that. So in that area, they're not looking at, using either bringing VAT to oil, to fuel, and also increase the telecommunication tax. These are commodities that are inelastic in demand. There's a lot of demand for them. So the capacity to generate revenue is very high. So they were looking at that as ways of, trying to ensure that government is able to fund the social investment expenditure, But, like Riley said, and they acknowledge, things are difficult. Nigeria are already going through a very hard time. So it's the wrong approach, in my view, to, at a time when some countries are actually, providing some relief for their citizens with, because of the elevated fuel prices, to now encourage or to suggest in whatever form that government should now, increase, the burden of the people who are already suffering, and these are very sensitive sectors or commodities, or services that have significant impact on the average, the level of the average Nigeria. I mean, fuel, once you touch fuel has implications on food prices, on transportation prices, on every other prices in the economy. Telecommunication is also being used extensively now, for income generations, So these are very sensitive sector services that really we shouldn't be talking about, deep, further taxing them or, I don't want to use punishing Nigerians at this time.
But
That's what
the,
it's about.
but the money has to come from somewhere, because we acknowledge and we all realize that there are a lot of people, millions of Nigerians, who need support. In other climes, it's structured well. You get it in your account at intervals, and it's just what it is. But the money has to come from somewhere. Now, we'll get to, well, how it addressed the central bank's focus on portfolio and all of that much later. But I'm concerned about this one. So how do we ensure that we get money to give the vulnerable and do it consistently? Where can that money come from? It's saying we might need to find a way to tax to get the monies. But if that is not the way, what should be the appropriate way?
Yeah, thank you, Kaude. You know, sometimes ago, I mean, some of us had supported removal of fuel subsidy. I mean, since 1994, have been campaigning for the removal of fuel subsidy. Okay, so when it came, it was something that naturally I worked on. I welcome from professional perspective. But when you do that, okay, when you remove those subsidies, the fund, the support that you get from that, the financial, you know, additional financial resources that you have, should have been used to target, you know, sectors and areas that will support the poor, who are going to be, you know, heavily impacted. You know, but what happened was that the increased revenue was just channeled to the, you know, to the general treasury, okay, without, you know, giving some relief or some support to the poor. So that's what we should have done. We should have done that, you know, deliberately in planning the reform. That the whatever savings that we are getting, additional revenue that we are giving, part of it will go to, you know, maybe cash transfer. Part of that will go to enhancing, you know, transportation and other areas that will bring down the cost, you know, the living cost for Nigerians. But we didn't do that, okay? So that is an error in my view. So in order to also address your question, you know, directly, we should ask, what are the state governments doing, okay? The state governments, everybody had benefited from this enhanced revenue, okay? But most of the time, the focus is on what the federal government is doing. The subnationals, what are they doing? In what areas are they improving, you know, investing to improve the livelihoods of Nigerians that are living in their areas? You know, that is important in my view. Two, there are loopholes, you know, and the IMF report actually mentioned about transparency, you know, in the fiscal process, in the budgeting process, you know, in our finances. Okay, so we talk about, you know, government expenditure of so much trillions of naira. Okay, where are those expenditures going? Who is actually ensuring that, you know, that this expenditure goes to the right sector, to the right, you know, to the right economic agents, and are managed well? What are we spending money on? What is the cost of governance? Okay, what are the wastes in the system? If you close loopholes, in many countries, when you are trying to, you know, make savings, you are not just making savings by raising taxes. You also make savings by closing loopholes. What are the existing loopholes in the system? Okay, that if you close them, you're able to save some amount of money that you can then divert to supporting the poor, you know, and the vulnerable at this point in time. That is one. Two is that you also have to look at, hey, are there sectors, are there, you know, the rich? Okay, we have a situation now where you have a very booming, you know, capital markets. Okay, you also have areas where, you know, the top people are, you know, it's some areas where they're making a lot of money. Then look at those areas, okay, and ensure that, okay, you are able to get revenue from them, through closing loopholes that whatever the rich enjoy, and those who are making capital gains or making a lot of money at this time, and then you divert that to supporting the poor, you know, and the vulnerables. So, in my view, the target should be one. We should have to find a way that whatever savings we have made from this oil, Nigerians, the poor people, benefit from that gain. Two, we must close whatever loopholes that exist in our expenditure system. You know, the high cost of governance. We need to find a way of doing that. And third, we should look at the areas where the rich and the wealthy people make money now, and try to see how we can get, you know, close whatever loopholes we have and get more revenue from there.
Yeah, Prof, let's talk about where the problem lies. You've mentioned a few things in passing, so I'm processing. Yes, on one hand, from the data available, we can say we have a revenue problem, but I believe we also have a spending problem. Whether that spending is about how we prioritize the spending or how we target that spending, I would like you to speak to that. I also feel that we have a data problem. And whether the system is overwhelmed or not, because if you look at income and non-income poverty, whether you're talking about multidimensional poverty or outright, poverty itself, the numbers don't look good. But the government will always tout these gains from the macroeconomic end, which are not, is not a lie. The numbers show for itself. But if you look at the other side, there is a downside risk to the micro, which the government have not been able to bridge. So I would like you to speak to spending priorities and spending problem. I'd like you to speak to the issue of data and maybe what the government can aggressively do based on what they have. Should we begin to cut our clothes according to our, is it cut our clothes according to our coat, according to our clothes, rather than just having this, we want to have a big economy and put these numbers and our deficit is large and we'll try to fill that deficit when we're spending about 15 trillion, almost a quarter of our revenue on servicing debts?
Yeah, thank you very much, Jeff. If you look at it, I mean, what happens in 2023, there are so many people, these are worthwhile policies, okay? But again, look at the massive resources, revenue that we have been able to mop up from that, okay? Like I said, from foreign exchange unification, from removal of subsidy, and so on and so forth. Huge resources have come to this country. Even in fact, in terms of our oil production, okay, massive resources have come. We've benefited in terms of increased high, price of oil from even the crisis in the Middle East. So we have so much money that had come in over the year, and then we have borrowed significantly. So if you look at the revenue pool, it's huge, okay, and that should have been able to start having some impact. Because whatever you are doing, people should be your target. Okay, the human being is the utility of that human being, that economic agent. That should be your priority. Okay, it's not in terms of the size, of revenue. Yeah, there may be some correlation, but more importantly is how do you improve the welfare of this average Nigeria? So if after 3 years, some of us had predicted, yes, there will be economic, difficulties. When you went back on reforms for 2 years or thereabout. But we're now at the end of third year, and there's no clear path. Both the IMF recommendations, the World Bank recommendations, everybody had pointed to social investment expenditure. You must find a way of ensuring that the average Nigerian, the vulnerables benefit from this. And that can be done. Like I mentioned, and I agree with your expenditure. I've said that if you look at our expenditure profile, we need to interrogate it more. Okay, we need to interrogate that one. The cost of construction in Nigeria is one of the highest in the world. In many areas there are loopholes. Cost of governance is still very high. We are maintaining a whole lot of very huge bureaucracy and government appointees. Those ones are there that we need to interrogate. Like I said, we must also bring in subnationals. What are they doing with their funding? Why must the priority be that you want to build the airports, you want to build high flyovers? How do they trickle down to impacting the average Nigeria? Okay, the rural farmers, where you produce, agricultural output is increasing, yet food prices are also rising. That is telling you there's a disconnect between the farmer who is producing more and the market. Okay, that rural infrastructure is part of the problem. Okay, storage is part of the problem. The market, the person produces cannot bring the food to the urban, to the market. So there are structural problems that we have to look at it. And then what is happening at the macro level? Yes, macro stability, all of this good report that we had. The IMF, the SAP, when we did start in 1986, we had the same thing. Anytime you do those kind of reforms, those outcomes you are seeing now will always come because they are in support of, or they are according to what we call the first welfare theory. Now, the first welfare theory, we only tell you that when you go the market way, competitive equilibrium is Pareto optima, it will give you all what you are seeing. But you should not stop at that. You must look at the second macroeconomic, the second welfare theory, which talks about distribution, which talks about welfare, which talks about how you go outside the market in order to support the vulnerables who will be impacted by what you are doing at the macro level. We are not doing that.
All right.
You see, and that, again, we don't have a economic management team in this government. We don't have a chief economic advisor. There's very little focus on the economic aspect, and expertise in terms of the policies that we are putting in place. doing the work itself, the rigor of the work. You see, all of these things should be calibrated. There must be some models that is guiding decisions that you are making, so that you can look for and prioritize, that this decision I'm making, these are the sectors that will gain, these are the sectors that will lose, these are the economic agents that will be impacted, and this is what I'm going to do in order to ensure that we mitigate those effects, and so on and so forth. We are not doing that. We just run the normal way, and we are getting those reports that we are expecting, but we are not taking care of the macroeconomic cost, of those policies, those policies.
Well, there's an abundance of recommendations as far as, the subject of what we should be doing is concerned. The concern is whether, these recommendations are getting to where it should get and whether there is a consensus, on implementation. Let's talk about what implications would be should these latest IMF recommendations be adopted. And I'll do an outlay, to put it in proper context. We have implemented the removal of fuel subsidy 2 years down the line now, and we've seen the impact, down to the micro level. There's also been, in recent times, from the beginning of this year, the increase in taxes. Taxes have gone up. There was also increase in import tariff, and we saw the impact on that in the import subsector for mechanical products, and especially, home appliances and vehicles. And this was done against the backdrop of the government social investment program, where the government says it has disbursed billions of naira to households. Yet we see, a macroeconomic indicator that the government is putting out that is at variance with micro. Now, what would be the implication of the adoption of this latest recommendation on an economy that is already strained? That's on the one hand. On the other hand, considering, our relationship with these Bretton Woods institutions and the fact that the administration in the past has adopted their recommendations, should we be worried that this latest round of recommendations by the IMF would be adopted by this administration?
Well, I mean, to the credit of the administration, they've not taken IMF loans. In spite of, yes, they take advice, they do some consultations, but they have, for a very long time refused, and, to take the loans from them. So what the IMF is doing is advisory, okay? I mean, if you go to any consultant, they will advise you. It's you that will have to do your homework properly, okay? I mean, and I've said it somewhere, when these people go to East Asia, go to this Asia, they go to India, they go to these other countries, they are experts meet with experts. Everybody sit down, you have your model, they have their models. Okay, we look at the implications of what it's going to do on the macroeconomy or the microeconomy. And on the basis of that, hey, we all converge and say, hey, this is the right way to go. So the IMF will not advise you to take the advice, who would like a thinker. Okay, now, if we do what they are asking us to do, like I said, it's just going to be the same thing, okay? It's going to be the same thing. In other words, government will get more revenue, but how is government going to spend that revenue? In what ways are they going to spend it in a way that will benefit the poor? That's the secondary question, because you don't have oversight over there. You can't command them on what they do, so they get more money. But it's at the cost of, the human cost of that is very high, okay? So the affordability issue is a major problem in Nigeria. Cost of living is a major issue. If you look at, what the average Nigerian is going through, and I see them, and I get bothered because, like I said, I'm an advocate of removal of subsidy. But that is not the way I thought we have, be able to go in terms of how we spend this money, that we save from this, the subsidy in order to take care of the poor. I think there's a total disconnect. So it's not just to look at it one way that, hey, you get more revenue, but it's also ensure that that revenue is allocated in such a way that one will be able to mitigate, if we cannot completely offset the distributive impact of that on the vulnerables. And more importantly, you then use that to also open up sectors like our power sector, like rural infrastructure. These are areas that are really very important, and, bring down to say, okay, the cost of living can also be brought down, security, addressing all those also of issues that will impact on productivity. But power is very important. rural infrastructure is very important. And that's where I think, some of the reforms, the with respect to the electricity sector, bringing the state into it, and closer monitoring of the state, in my view, is very important in addressing some of these issues. So if you go this way, it's going to just going to magnify, exacerbate, the affordability crisis that and the welfare loss that Nigerians are going through, the average Nigerian.
So, Prof, in closing, are you seeing anything in practical terms that this government is doing currently based on what they've done in terms of their reform policies? Now they've seen the impact, but it sounds like the rhetoric remains the same, especially from the president, who, in what I like to paraphrase it like, I've done what is necessary. I understand it's painful. All you have to do is to wait and see whether I was right or wrong. He has maintained that posture since the very beginning of this reform. Is that a good place to put himself as the president of Nigeria from the citizens' point of view? Is he putting himself in harm's way, or that is just the best he can do? Because people are feeling like you can do something to help alleviate the pain we're already feeling. This is talking layman now, not any economic jargon now, because that's the reality we are facing. What can he do, or he should just maintain his posture? What do you advise?
Jeff, by God's grace, I'm a professor of economics. I've been a professor over 20 years now. We have economists across this country. The market by itself is doing what it is doing now. Okay, the market doesn't care about outcome. Okay, if you say efficiency, you say, okay, go the efficiency way. If that efficiency, if it's only 10% that will benefit, you will get 90% or 100% of that efficiency. The market doesn't care by itself. It doesn't care. So you cannot entirely live your life and give it to the market. That's why the government has a role to play, and the experts are important. Like I said, we used to have Economic Intelligence Committee that has models. They will run the models, So you are not doing things blindly. You are doing things, in that you know what are the scenarios that will come and what you need to put in place to ensure you mitigate that. So we can't do this and think that the outcome will be different. If we continue to do what we are doing, and we are not doing the deliberate policies, okay, to address some of the constraints, okay, to the macroeconomic constraints that of productivity, like I said, power, and some of these other things that would, rural infrastructure, if we don't do all of that and deliberate intervention in some of the key sectors, okay, that impact on the poor, we will continue to have these outcomes. Social adjustment program, we were there. Everything we see now in terms of macroeconomic stability balances, they're what we saw under SAR. But SAR led to deindustrialization. It led to industrialization of average Nigeria. All what you are doing, they also want. So you have to have a team. You need to. That's what I say. The governance structure is very important. Okay, the economic governance that will ensure that you know what to do, and they are doing in a way they are working together. Okay, not that you just do this policy in this sector. You go to the industrial sector, you did something that is contradicting what agriculture is doing. They must become in a holistic way. All right. And that's where development plans and some of these other things also become very important in order to ensure that you have that consistency across policies and programs.
As we wind down now, Prof, and this is, also an important part of the conversation, and if you can do it in 60 seconds, the IMF did acknowledge in that report that about 27 million Nigerians have been at the risk of poverty in the fall of 2026. Thankfully, you're a professor of economics. Against a backdrop of that very grim assessment, it is still recommending taxes in petrol, telecommunications. If you sat on that board, what would your recommendation be for Nigeria? Would it be the same as this document, or it would be slightly different?
I'll be slightly different. I'll be different because I agree. They support what I'm saying, which is cash transfers. You must support the vulnerable. They acknowledge that. But they are saying that you must fund it by taxing, oil fuel and telecommunication. I would say no. Hey, to fund that cash transfers, let's look at what can we save from current expenditure and the huge bureaucracy that we have and government and things. What can we save from that? Then what loopholes can we also close in the areas of taxation of the rich and other things that the rich people are doing. So I agree, both of us agree that we must provide cash transfers and some support for the vulnerables, but I will differ in terms of how we do that and where we look at in order to do that.
All right. Well, boss, thank you very much, Prof, for your sound analysis, and thank you for coming on the program. Professor Adeola Adenikinju is a senior economist and professor of economics, University of Ibadan. Thank you for your time on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Well, there's more to come on the program. We're still weighing in on the subject of national security. We'll get more perspectives after this time out. Join us again.